And joining us today, we've got Nicholas Ferguson, who's artist and creative mischief maker. I like the sound of that. Nicholas, how are you?
I'm great, thanks. Yeah, really good. Out here in Ibiza, the birds are
Nice.
chirping, the roosters are doing their thing, and I'm talking to you.
You lucky sod. Yeah, lucky for me too. But we'll just do the context for the whole thing. Why don't you tell us what you're up to and where people can find your stuff, your websites and your socials, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. So, I'm an artist and creative mischief maker, as you said. What does that entail? So, I've got two sides to my business. The first is my painting and art practice, which is called Atelier Naf, spelled ATELIER-NAF.com. And that's where you'll find my art. My Instagram is of the same name. And then for my coaching and workshops, which I hold as well, which are all around intuition, imagination, and consciousness, those are under thecolorofsplash.com. It's currently being reconstructed, but you'll find me on Instagram.
And that's okay. And that's Atelier Naf on Instagram.
Atelier Naf, yeah, Atelier_Naf on Instagram.
Perfect. All right. Mr. Kindness, MISTER, kindness_pod, if you want to follow us on Instagram. Mr. Kindness on X, Mr. Kindness on YouTube, everywhere. That's it. I've got that one sewn up. That's I was actually very surprised that when I started doing this podcast, that I thought, when you think you're looking for blocks in your life, things to stop you doing what you really want to do. Well, we will probably end up talking about this very subject.
We'll touch on that.
That we tend to put blocks in our lives as excuses for not getting things done that our intuition, as you mentioned, is screaming at us to do. So I thought, let's check and see if there is a mrkindness.com website available, the domain name with Mr. MR Kindness was taken. I was not surprised by that. But then I thought I'll try MISTER kindness.com and it came up. And then same thing on YouTube, same thing. Everywhere I went, it was the same. So these blocks that I was looking for were not in my way. So I had no choice but to carry on. It's almost like it was divinely set in motion. What do you reckon?
100%. I think, what I'm learning through and we'll come full circle in a sec, I imagine, to where I started off. But in terms of what I'm learning today and now is that I am the predominant creator in my life. I create most of what happens to me, which includes my blocks. And so if things aren't working the way I want them to work, then either I'm getting in my own way. and there'll be reasons for that, either because I'm acting on ego or because it isn't true for me to do it, which you could say is the same thing, basically.
Yeah, that's perfect. Because let's, I only met you on Friday and this is Tuesday. And we were at a James Bond themed party atop a mountain in a place called Verbier, Switzerland, and you're actually English Swiss or born in Switzerland indeed. For sure. And so we were at a party together and I had never met you. We introduced ourselves, started chatting. And it's one of these parties, I knew almost everyone there, friends and things, and hadn't met you before. We got chatting and, you expect the usual, party chit chat, nothing of substance. And then I asked you what you did. And, my interest was piqued when you said you're an artist. And then you talked about working with intuition when you're doing your work. And my beer was on the other side of the terrace. I said, don't move. I'll be right back. I'm just going to find my beer. And I came back and then we continued. Right. Now there's something to talk about. And we ended up talking most of the night, I think. You couldn't get away from me. Sadly, but we ended up having some really good conversation when everyone else was partying hard. But that's how things work, And we had chat on the Saturday and decided that we should do a podcast together. So here we are. And so the way that this podcast has turned out, certainly not to my expectation, is become a bit of a dive into how to be a better person, but without trying to sound like a guru, a life guru, or one of these Tony Robbins type people, because that works for some people, but I think for a lot of people it doesn't, because it's a lot of changes that has to be made in your life, and a lot of people can't do that. They certainly can't sometimes even afford those courses. but it's also a time thing. If you've got a family or if you've got business commitments, it doesn't really matter what it is. I like to see if I can do things, change little things in your life that makes your life actually better. And what it's become really interesting for me lately is to talk about intuition. Intuition leading to purpose and meaning in one's life. And also about creativity and how important creativity is in your life. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So let's go straight into it. Go on then. You start.
Yeah, so I think it's really interesting. As a child, I was described as being quite sensitive. And I was quite emotional. I was very in touch with what I realize now is I was very in touch with my intuition. What does that mean? It means that I would be in situations where I would be receiving information about what to do. And it felt like it was something beyond me. It would be a case of go there, don't go there. This person is for you. That person isn't for you. Slow down, etc. And I was very connected to art and imagination. So when I was in my I might have been as young as, I would have been as young as 11. I was creating board games. There was a board game that I loved, which was called Hotel. And I loved the travel industry. So I created my own version of that, which was around airlines. And I literally created it as a board game. And my brother and I would play all sorts of imaginative games. We'd be writing comics. And I imagine lots of children do this. But I was very in touch with a very vivid imagination, which would keep us entertained for hours and hours. And then it's interesting. I went to boarding school. And at boarding school, again, one of the pillars of that school was spirit. And at the time, I didn't think it was very cool because, I wanted to be cool. I was 16 to 18 when I was at that school. And the idea of spirit wasn't cool. And to add to that, I was made church prefect in my last year. So it's like, all of a sudden, I represent the least cool thing in this school. But it's funny because for me, intuition and spirit, and you could say religion, although religion is organized spirit, are one of the same thing. And when you look at the arts as well, and we were talking about this briefly on Friday, particularly in indigenous traditional cultures such as the Aborigines of Australia, they use art as a means of speaking with the divine. And so for me, there's this incredible realization that I've had that, I believe we're all divine. I'm not suggesting I'm special by any means, but when we are able to speak to the divine, which for me is intuition, then we're able to create incredible art. And when I say art, it's anything that's man-made. So it could be creating this phone, or it could be creating a piece of art, a painting, a piece of music, whatever it might be.
Or a podcast.
Or a podcast. There you go. Exactly.
That's my creative outlet.
Or exactly 100%. And so that's my realization now is, and I've always been an artist, and my intuition was telling me that's what I should do when I was younger. I then ended up going into the corporate world. I ended up going into marketing and all sorts of other things. I met incredible people. I worked in the hospitality industry. I worked in the beauty industry. And what I recognize in those spaces is it's all about storytelling, and it's all about working with people, being with people. So no regrets about that. But what I've come, and also, I don't really like the word coaching people, but developing people, I guess, because when I had teams, that's what I did. And it's funny how now I've come full circle. And in the last few years, I've become an artist, and I work with my intuition, and I help other people access their intuition through art workshops and the like.
All right. Now, before we get to the meat of it, I would like to know what it was about Well, what put you back onto the art road? You said that you were working in a corporate world, and then
Yeah.
you told me you got ill, and then you decided to change your life.
Yeah, so I was working for a big beauty conglomerate. I was doing quite well. I was being promoted. I was a marketing director in around 10, it was 10 years ago now to this day. And I was working long hours. Um, but there was something that kept telling me that this isn't it, Nicholas. There's something more to you than what you're doing now. And I was working these long hours, but I was also drinking a lot and taking a lot of drugs. And so the hedonistic lifestyle was on full speed.
Doesn't sound all that bad.
It was fun, but it was one of those things where I was like, how do I get out of this? Because I could see what it was doing to my health, my mental health in particular, and at the same time, it was one of those things which I'd always been told this is the way to go. This is what you do. This is what success looks like. My dad worked for a big corporate company, and a lot of our family friends and the like worked for big corporate companies. So this is what you do. You climb a ladder of a big corporation, and that comes with a boozy lifestyle and potentially a druggy lifestyle. Not that my dad ever talked about that side of things, let's say. And I was like, I don't really know what the options are. I don't see what the other options are. And I ended up burning out. And I was doing long hours, and I was taking some pretty heavy stuff. And then I just burnt out. I was just like, I can't do this anymore. I've got to get out.
Mm.
So I found an opportunity in a favela in Rio. I don't know what you're about to say, but I found an
No, I
opportunity in
was
a
just going to ask
favela
you
in
what
Rio.
kind of drugs. You don't
I
have to
was,
go into it if you don't want to.
so I'm a gay man on the gay scene. There are a series of chemsex drugs. So they're drugs which you take to get off your tits and have lots of sex, lots of really hardcore sex, just really good sex. And so
Can you
it's
list these exactly, please, and how to spell them?
methadone is one of them.
What's methadone? Is that
Methadone
the?
or meow 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 meow.
Is methadone? No, that's methadone, the heroin substitute.
Methadone is the heroin substitute. So methadone is
What's
a chemical derivative um, of khat, which is
yeah,
a herb which the East Africans chew.
yeah.
And then another one is GHB, which is sometimes known as liquid ecstasy. And then the final one is crystal meth, which for me was a massive red line in the sand because it was like, what the fuck are you doing? But when everybody around you is doing it, it's kind of like, I don't know. Eventually it became normalized to the point where I was like, this is normal. This is what we do. So it was those drugs combined with a crazy work schedule, let's put it that way, and responsibilities that ended up with me in a favela in Rio de Janeiro because I decided to do some volunteering work and get out of London.
That sounds like a really good way to burn out.
Yeah.
Working long hours, no sleep, lots of drugs and alcohol. What kind of symptoms did your burnout take?
I mean, for me, it was paranoia was the biggest one. Paranoia was a
Lack of
massive
sleep.
contributing factor. Lack of sleep. I mean, it wasn't like I was doing this all the time, but it was enough that it was affecting my seriously affecting my mental health. And there's such shame and taboo associated with these drugs in society that it wasn't like I could talk to that many people about it. I could talk to some of my closest friends, but then also there's an element of this being normalized in society. I forgot what you said now.
No. What were the symptoms of your burnout?
So paranoia was
Paranoia. You
one of
said
them.
paranoia.
Lack of confidence, an inability to deal with stress in the way that I dealt with stress before. Um, and so yeah, I just said to the business, I need to take a break. I need time out. And I was looking to go traveling. I think if you would, I mean, this is where you can get into some deep stuff. If I think, looking back on it now, my soul, this sounds a bit corny, but was looking for a way out.
Yeah,
Right?
honestly, you can say anything you want, and I'll believe you because I'm very open minded when it comes to these things, and I've spoke to a lot of people who have really opened their hearts and souls. Let's say that, on this podcast because they were really hurting inside, and it's that it is your soul's release. You got to that's your. Wait, I think what happens, Nicholas, is it happened to me when I was a young man, and I didn't go quite through the list that you did there, but there was drugs and alcohol being used when I was young, and I just felt like I was absolutely miserable in life because I needed something to do. I needed to get away, and I get away from that particular scene and go and do something positive with my life, or at least positive in my head, which was something that was going to be positive. I joined the army. Whether you call it, for me, it certainly was a positive. Maybe not for the people on the other side, but that's so I understand. So if you want to go deep on it, please do go.
Yeah,
full
I mean,
spiritual.
so I think my soul was basically. I mean, I knew that there was something more to me than what I was doing. I was unsatiated in the corporate world. Society tells you that you need to earn a living, you need to have a head over a roof over your head, and everything else. And I had those things, but I wasn't satiated. I wasn't fulfilled. And so I was looking for satisfaction elsewhere. And I think that's where the drugs come in at the end of the day. But they ended up getting me into a situation where I couldn't cope anymore. So in fact, in many respects, I don't think I created that very situation where I couldn't deal with the work situation. I ended up in Rio, which is probably one of the most soulful cities in the world, where people are so connected to their heart and to their soul. It has its dysfunctions, but that's human nature. And I was in a favela, and people in that community they have their issues, as I said, but they're so in the moment at the same time. There's such strong community, and sure there were guns around me and all sorts of other things, but I felt safe. I felt held, and and the music and the rhythm of that culture is just nuts. So I came back from that, and I knew that I couldn't just slot back into the world that I'd done before, so back into the corporate world. So I left that role, and then I became a consultant. I'll keep this quick because this kind of doesn't really touch on the soulful stuff. But I ended up working for an Indian client in Delhi, a beauty business, and again, a culture that is very connected to spirit. More so, I'd say, in some ways. Well, it's a different lens. It's more of a Hindu Buddhist lens rather than. It's interesting. I'm just kind of realizing this as I speak. Like Brazil's there is a spiritual lens to it, but there's also an organized religious lens to it through a Christian lens, which has its own challenges. But in the Indian client that I was with was very open to all of this kind of stuff. Very much a believer that we have the capacity to heal our own bodies if we learn how to breathe deeply, for example. And also very much a believer in following your soul's calling. But I still knew that what I was doing then, so I was a consultant, but I was like, this isn't it. This is not it. I was doing as much, if not more work than I'd been doing on the inside. I said that. That was a Freudian slip. Mm-hmm. And I still wasn't getting what I believed to be real soulful satisfaction. And so COVID came along, and I felt this calling to do more painting. Now, what I recognized in many respects for a while, what I'd been doing through painting was really trying to prove to people that I could paint, show them that I can paint what you see in a 2-dimensional or 3-dimensional format. And again, for me, that's ego. That's not soul. That's me trying to prove to the world that I am something. And so my journey since then, so we're now in 2020, 2021, has been to connect to my intuition and to be able to learn to channel what I receive.
Same for me. It was COVID. That's when I started this, 21. 4 years ago. because I don't know, there was something, it's not just me. I've spoken to quite a few people who took up a creative outlet in their lives during that time. I guess he didn't have much choice. There wasn't much to do, was there? I
Yeah,
guess that's a benefit of that stuff. If you think about it, would you close all the bars and, had they closed all the, you couldn't buy any booze or anything like that, then, I don't know if people would have gone insane, or whether they would have actually found a creative outlet in order to pass the time, much like people did, 150 years ago, when there was very little in the way of entertainment. You start writing, or I don't know. There's a lot of outlets you can have. Anyway, I digress. Go on.
I think the interesting thing, yeah, absolutely. I read Julia Cameron's book, The Artist's Way, during COVID. And it's a 2-month read. So each chapter you read over a course of a week, and it comes with homework, exercises. And it's very much about being connected with spirit, with God. She refers to spirit as God. And that taught me to let go a little bit. And I had something I was about to say. I think the recognition I have is that, as children, we're shaped by our parents and by society. And as I've heard on some of your previous podcasts, and I also very much believe, as children, we become separate from spirit. When we're born, we become separate from spirit. And then the journey through adulthood is basically a journey of coming back to spirit and remembering who we are. And when I was a child, I was very much advised not to become you can't earn a living by being creative. And so that's resonated in the back of my mind the whole time. And that creates my reality, because that's how we are as humans. Our limiting beliefs, unless we're aware of them, they create our reality. Because the thoughts and feelings I have then shape the actions that I take, which then reinforce the thoughts and feelings that I have, which are effectively a form of misguided imagination. Because I believe, and the alchemists believe, that alchemy is a life guided by imagination.
Well, I sent you those 2 podcasts over the weekend. So I did a podcast with a friend of mine called Roger Lambert. I can't remember what episode it was. I'll remember that before the end. And then I did another one with him and a guy called Israel Ruiz, American alchemist. What did you think of those? Because you told me you budding, or just started doing alchemy. And these are alchemists, not like, they don't wear pointy hats with long beards. They're creating medicines, which is part of, which was alchemy was used for up until modern medicine. Just FYI, everyone who's listening, it's not just about turning lead into gold. But what did you think of those guys? Did you get any inspiration from them?
Yeah, I mean, they're brilliant. I think if I start with Roger and his podcast, and just an understanding, I mean, what I can remember from listening to that podcast is his talk about entities inhabiting our space and adopting entities as we're in lower vibration. So basically, what I understand, and by no means am I referring to myself as an expert here, although I do have a solid understanding. But the world is vibrational, and when we're in low vibration, we attract things of low vibration. And that can include other entities, which in Roger's podcast, he said can then almost become parasitic and feed upon our energy. So we feel depleted, we feel tired. And so that was powerful. And then in the interview with Roger and Luis, is it Luis? Israel, sorry.
Or he
Israel.
calls himself Raven. That's his name. His spirit animal.
I thought something really interesting off the back of that was how disconnected we've become as human beings. And he talks about being able to see the world through the lens of the fox by consuming a fox, basically. Now, my mentor, William Whitecloud, has had experiences of shapeshifting where you become one with the vibration of what you want to experience. It's still something that I'm learning myself, but you set an intent. It's like the way I've learned intuition, for that matter. If I set an intention, I'll come back to intention in a second, to become the vibration of something, and I give up needing to know how to do it, then I quieten my rational mind and I become present to receive. And when I
Can you say that again for me, please?
Yes.
About setting your
So
intention?
when I
Just to rephrase that, or say it again.
So intentionality is a really interesting thing, and it's something that's now becoming scientifically proven. So our brains can process about, I don't know, 2 billion pieces of information per second, but most of that is unconscious. We're unaware of it. About 2,000 bits of information can be processed at any moment in time by our brains consciously. So what intention does is it says, okay, this is what I want, brain, this is what I want you to focus on. So I'm going to set an intention to be of service to you, Mr. Kindness. And in that, and then by also giving up the need to know and choosing to observe what's obvious, I quieten my rational mind, and I put myself in a situation where I'm able to receive intuition.
So when you say that, are you, just so I get this clear, you're at the same time you're switching off your conscious mind, and you're actually saying to your brain, don't think about anything else, just think about that. Would that be correct?
100%. Yep.
And it's as simple as that, because I've got a scrambled brain that keeps on. I'm all over the shop.
But it's a constant process of so there's a couple of things to this. If I want to receive intuition, then I will set the intention to receive whatever I want to receive. So it could be a truth of a situation, what's going to serve me in my highest good. So I'll say, that's what I'd like to receive. And then I'll say, I choose to be of service to myself. I let go of needing to know how. And I choose to observe the obvious.
Yeah, that's the bit. When you say you don't need to know how, can you just go a bit into that? Because that's where I seem to struggle. I'm trying to know that I would like things to. So I need this to be explained to me, Nicholas. I need that to be.
So as soon as
that's how my brain works. So don't explain it to me. Tell me how to not explain it to me. Tell me how to.
So as soon as you want to know how, you're in your ego, and you're not
exactly.
And ego basically is there to help us keep safe, and it has a purpose. It also provides our personality. We would be nothing without our ego. So it's not that, some people paint the ego as an evil thing. It's not. It's a necessary evil. But if we're stuck in trying to figure things out or referencing our past, then we're not present to receive information, new information. And new information for me is inspiration. And it's inspiration when either where you're connecting dots where things may have existed before, that's one form of inspiration, but it may be completely new inspiration.
And an don't worry about the method.
Yeah, don't worry about don't worry about how. And I run workshops here in Ibiza now where I help artists. Actually, none of them are artists. They're people who are of different age groups, who have been told at some point in time in their life that they're crap at painting and drawing. And we do a couple of exercises where I show them through definition, and definition is another really powerful way of shifting your vibration. The first definition we do is, I'm a victim. We get the person to step into that circle where they feel like they're a victim. And it's amazing to see them then draw that out. And what you get is one thing. And then I get them to step in a second definition, which is creative genius. Now, that might sound quite pompous and grandiose, but the word genius comes from genie, which in Latin meant the spirit within. One of its meanings was the spirit within, which implies that all of us have genius if we're connected to it. And when people step into that circle and they draw from that, the results are just phenomenal. And I'll give one more example from those workshops. We do another series of 2 circles. One of them is, I'm not an artist. We get people to paint from that space. And the interesting thing is when I do that exercise, I go into trying to formally draw whatever it is, a chicken, for example, was the thing I was doing the other day. And then when we go into a second circle, and the second circle is the artist, I forget about the need to prove. And all of a sudden, I don't have it with me here now, but I can send it to you afterwards. I drew this, you could make out that it was a bird, you could make out that it was a chicken, but there was so much emotion to this creature, which wasn't there in the first version because my head was involved.
Do you think?
And
I was just going to say, when you talked about when you're using these, setting the scenes with these, mindset is the only word that comes to mind at the moment. But you talked about creative genius, and you go into that task with the mindset of a creative genius. That's because we're quite simple. Our brains are quite simple. That they do well. They're not fundamentally. They're quite simple. They do to try to do what they're told to do, and to your best advantage, I suppose it would be. It's like I mentioned before. We put up blocks. We can't put up blocks, but just something as simple as do this, perform this task like you are the best artist in the world or a creative genius, and that actually does change your mindset, doesn't it?
Yeah, if you think about how much negative chatter I'm going to speak for myself, how much negative chatter I have about myself, that I'm defining myself as that. And what I believe our role as humans is, and this is what we were talking about this on Friday night. What's his name? Krishnamurti was saying, he said the definition of enlightenment is to not identify with thoughts and feelings. Because your thoughts and feelings aren't real, they're just referencing the past. And so if you're not referencing the past, then you're present to receiving whatever you need to receive in the moment. And so I think our purpose as humans is to be constantly, and this sounds like work, it doesn't have to be work, is to be constantly refocusing, recognizing where we're coming from. Am I coming from my past, my thoughts and feelings, what I believe I need to be doing, or am I coming from intuition, from guidance? And the thing is, often intuition, because it's not referencing the past, it does require courage, because I've had guidance in the past to sell my home. And I did. I sold my home. And interestingly enough, shortly after, there were a number of costs that came in for that property. It was also at a time when the market was at a good place to sell. But it didn't seem, logically, it didn't make sense. And that's because logic is referencing the past. And there are so many instances where your intuition knows best. I refer to it as our rational minds can see the valley. I'm in a valley. You're definitely in a valley. You're in Shab. Our intuition can see over the mountain. And the key thing is knowing where you're going. And actually, I did a painting about this, which is called "None of You Really Know What the Fuck You're Doing, but You Better Know Where You're Going." And when I say that, I include, I know where I'm going.
Everyone,
but, we all need to know. We all need to know where we're going, basically. And how we know where we're going is by connecting to our genius. Because if the thing is, there's another really interesting person in this space, Robert Fritz. He doesn't call himself an alchemist, but he's a creative. And he's a musician, but he's also done lots of workshops. He's worked with companies and all sorts. And he's a master of tension. What do I mean by tension? Tension is where you're going, where you want to go to, here, and where you are now, here. And by having these two spaces, which most people want to close, most people want them to be pretty much here so that it feels realistic. But by having them here, it sets up a creative tension between the two, which can be experienced as stress. And when you ask from this space of where you want to get to, you say, so imagine I'm now in the vision. I'm saying, well, how did I get here to my current reality? You get a step, an action step. says, take this action. And it's just one small step. To your point earlier, it's one small step that leads you in the direction of where you're going.
You've set my brain off there. So our future self, the future, so we're becoming time travelers in the space that we want to get to, in the let's call it the life we want to have, let's say, in the future. And we in the present now want to be at that space in the future, which is causing us at the moment, in our present moment, it's causing us tension and the feeling of longing, not feeling like you're achieving your goals, which is causing stress and makes you unhappy. But when you put yourself into that future self, in that space where you want to be in, if you start listening to that future self, which is if I am, tell me if I'm wrong, is the intuition talking to you, giving you some guideposts?
They're kind of two things. So I know I work a modality that helps me to see what the truth of our genius is. It's a meditation which helps to see my land of plenty, is what we call it. It's a modality that I've learned, and it shows. And in that space, multiple key people can tune into my land of plenty, and we all get similar things because it's true it's potential. It's not guaranteed. I have to step into it. So once you have that information, then the other part of it is this piece with the creative tension. So as I said, everything is vibration. And so if you're in a vibration of, well, let's use my example. I know my truth is to be a painter, an artist, which is what I'm doing. Am I where I want to be? Not yet. But the more I act, it's that fake it to make it kind of analogy. The more I act as if I am that person, the more I will attract that, the more I will become that, rather than identifying with where I am today.
Yeah, that's pretty much an accurate description of my life, is deciding that you want to do something. I'm almost pretending that you've done it, and just a little, like it is, it's just little small steps towards where you want to be. And the unhappiness, I think, in modern, certainly in our modern life, the unhappiness I feel comes from a yearning for not necessarily a better life, because we've got all of our Maslow hierarchy things covered nowadays. But what we're lacking, I think, is the creative outlet, or the spirit side, or whatever it is that everyone's missing. And I think a lot of people, almost everyone that I know, won't admit the fact that that's what's missing in their life, thinking that if you get more money, they work harder, do more drugs, drink more booze, whatever it's going to be that makes you feel like you're having a good time or you're achieving what you're supposed to be achieving to get you that glow. But another thing I've been learning over the last 4 years is serial goal setters who do, and I'm mainly physical things, but it's also a mental thing, but they're doing ultra marathons and these pretty insane physical challenges, which are also very, very mental. Finish it. And I've experienced this myself, and so I'm not that keen to do it anymore, is that once you've accomplished the task, it's done. That you've moved on to the next thing, and you're still chasing that high. And from my point of view, I think we've lost contact with our spirit, and that's where the unhappiness comes from, because once you have a contact with spirit, and I don't really know a better way to put it, or you could say God, whatever you want to call it, it does bring a great deal of comfort, I think, because you realize that there is something bigger than all of us, and that We're not just on a because when you think about it this way, if you're just on a hamster wheel, the rat race, some great, really, really great phrases for it, isn't it? The hamster wheel, the rat race, all these things. And they're so good because it's true. You're pedaling like crazy and never really getting anywhere. You're not really achieving anything that you want to achieve. And I guarantee you, even if you became a billionaire or if you became the CEO of the company you were working for, you're not going to be, you don't get into that office and then say, yes, I made it. Now you've got another level of stress that you never even thought you're going to be experiencing. And so that's my view on it. That's my current view on it. I think it's been my view all my life, is that we're all searching for a meaning in life. And, how do you get some comfort? How do you get some comfort in life? And as you mentioned, like the people, I remember I went to Lembongan, so an island off of the coast of Bali in Indonesia. And, I had the corporate job. We all had corporate jobs, living the life I was told to live by everyone, and these were fishermen living in this just incredibly beautiful island. Fishermen, and they were all smiling and happy, and they didn't have very much at all, but they were very, very welcoming, very cool, and that's why it really bothered me when I saw that. Why are they so bloody happy, and we're not? That's what got me. Keep talking. I realized that my laptop's unplugged, so I was gonna plug it in.
I think there's a couple of things.
Still hear you.
Brilliant. There's a couple of things that come to mind from what you just shared. The first is going back to the alchemical analogy. Is the alchemists talk about the pendulum, and that we can't escape the pendulum. And the pendulum I'm going to speak to is the pendulum of soul versus ego. And when we're in our soul purpose, our ego is screaming at us to come back here, back to safety. So you're unsafe. You're too close to the fire. And I think that's when a lot of artists turn to drugs, because there's a need for escapism. On the other hand, when we're too safe, our soul is screeching, come back this way. So it's this yin yang between the two, wanting to go back and forth. But then the other thing you said, I remember it suddenly came to me last week, and I was there's this quote in this book called Presence, which is, without man, what for the gorilla? In other words, I'm paraphrasing that, but in other words, it's questioning if man weren't to exist, then would the gorilla be in better hands? And what I think that quote pulls into question is, well, what is our role on this planet? And I think that comes back to your point about those people that you spotted in, did you say Bali or Thailand? Bali, I think.
Bali, yeah.
I think we've lost our place among the ecosystem. We consider ourselves to be separate from nature. We don't consider ourselves to be part of nature. I actually did a painting about this a couple of years ago, and I think the funny thing is the genie's out of the bottle. We can't all go back to living a life in the jungle necessarily, but we have become separated, and I think that is part of this seeking of purpose and seeking for more in our lives. And until we recognize that we are part of the whole complex puzzle, then that will haunt us.
Well, Nicholas, we are only one comet strike from being back in nature again, because that's all it takes for a reset. And you wonder, if you go down this sort of conspiracy hole, like I tend to do sometimes, we hear about lost civilizations. We hear about Atlantis is one, and I've done a couple of podcasts about Atlantis because it's just such a good story. It's one of these things that's just can't be proven, can't be disproven, but it's just so interesting. I happen to think that advanced civilizations have lived on this planet before. I don't believe that we just popped up 6,000 years ago, 8,000 years ago, and created all this. I think that's what we live in now. I think we have it. It's in our DNA to create, and sometimes not for the best, but certainly we can create. That's what humans are very good at. It separates us from everyone else, and from the rest of the animals. But And it seems that, this is just me being a little bit hyperbolic, but these comets seem to come at times when Atlantis apparently had become completely corrupt. This is based on channeled books, authors who've been channeled by spirits from people who lived in Atlantis. Actually, you know what? It sounds crazy. Edgar Cayce stuff. This guy was the psychic of the early 20th century, and who was used by. He was a healer who used. He was a psychic healer, and but everyone went to him, and I mean everyone from presidents of the United States, Henry Ford, that kind of thing. All that level of people, because he had something like a 98% healing record. It was insane. Edgar Cayce, look him up. Anyway, I digress a little bit.
I'll write that down.
I'll send you Edgar, like Edgar,
Cayce.
and Cayce is Cayce. It's really fascinating. I'll send you that podcast as well. Listen to it. It's a good laugh at the very least. But it seems to come when that culture or the earth, the people on the earth have become corrupted by greed and perversion and a lack of, start doing the human sacrificing. And that's the sort, it seems to be that you get these repetitions of comet strikes, which cause 90% of the people on earth to die, and everyone else is left to start from scratch. So you mentioned that, we're living in a situation right now where we're disconnected from nature. The only ones who are going to survive a comet strike are those who are living in nature, and can support themselves. The ones that don't get the comet landing on top of them, of course. But if you're in the Amazon rainforest and you're an uncontacted tribe, guess what? You've got a far better chance of surviving than we do, because we live in a situation and a civilization where if the electric goes off for 3 days, we're just going back to we're going back to, Escape from New York. Showing my age there. But, you're going into a chaos hellhole, and it's all going to be about food and who's got the most guns and ammunition and food, and everyone else is going to die. And I don't really want to experience that, but that does happen regularly. So that connection to nature might be forced back upon us.
Yeah, it may well be. I think I have heard one thing about about Atlantis and whether Atlantis existed or not. But I've heard that it was a myth of sorts, to suggest the risks of a too developed third eye, so too developed intuition, where we become separate from our humanness as well at the same time. And so I don't know. I mean, it's interesting whether it actually. I do very much believe. You look at the pyramids of Egypt. You look at the pyramids of Latin America, Central America. You look at
China,
other China, exactly. You look at these structures, and they're huge structures that you question how they could have been built with the technology of the day, even with today's technology. To be honest, with in the precision that they were laid and in the direction that they were facing and all the rest of it. So I definitely think that we're capable of so much more than we believe. And I think, going back to what we were saying before, we're in a society now which is so focused on what we know, what we can see, the rational mind. We're so rationally minded that we've given up this connection to spirit. It's poo-pooed, it's looked down upon. And it's interesting, there was a famous, I don't know how much of a debate it was, but there was a dislike between William Blake and Sir Isaac Newton. Sir Isaac Newton was an alchemist himself, but then he became it's a friend outside. Then he became disconnected from intuition and alchemy and became one of the first rationalists. And William Blake berated him for that, because William Blake was considered a nut job in his time. But now we look back on him as a genius. He was ahead of his time. He was, writing poetry and talking about mythology in a way that is very respected today.
Was he an artist as well, William Blake?
Yeah, he was a painter and a poet. Yeah,
painter. Yeah, he did? If I'm right, he did these almost not satanic. It's not the word, but there was a lot of, I don't know, sometimes some satanic looking Is that the one I'm thinking of?
Yeah, there were devils, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
he was what people say was he was connected with the other world. So the other world being the world of intuition, the world of fairies, which we talked about on Friday.
Yeah.
And, and it's interesting how I think we talked about this as well, like how it doesn't necessarily. I'm going to say this, but I'll have to come around to it. Like it doesn't necessarily serve societies for people to be completely connected to their intuition because then you're one is open to opportunities and that can when I say opportunities, creativity, but incredible creativity, which can therefore um, render the current state of affairs um, obsolete or
Are you saying they go mental?
well no I think when if creativity is a spectrum, here on one hand is you're copying other things. So it's not creative. Yeah, I mean, there's an element of creativity, but you're basically taking other things and copying them. And on the other hand, on here is pure creativity, which is uninfluenced by other things. And I think this form of creativity comes from spirit, connection to spirit. And you could say Leonardo, when he designed the helicopter, he was inspired by the way a seed fell through the sky.
Yeah.
Never seen anything flying, but but in his time, and people would be like, "What the hell? How are you ever going to produce that?"
Mm. Well, I you mentioned something before, which I want to ask you about as well. You mentioned how uh, artists. I know I'm talking about, like, let's go rock stars, pop stars. How many of them turn to drugs because they're, as you said, they are creative. You know, they write incredible music, which is why they become so famous. Which is why they become, they. I guess that there's a toll there with the fame and well, the opportunity and the money to do pretty much whatever you want. So they've sampled all of the garden of earthly delights and earthly pleasures. But I often think that if you're on stage, and let's say you go on a tour, and a tour takes a year and a half, and you're playing the same songs every night, almost every night, the same songs, that's going to drive you nuts. I'm not surprised that they turn to drugs. And then, so I guess they miss the whole point, I think, of becoming a musician. And I'm using musician as the example here, is that you want to be creative and write new music. And but all you're doing is you're getting onto that treadmill. The rat race gets you. And, the creativity almost goes out the window. And that's absolutely no surprise to me that people like, let's use the example of Jimi Hendrix or Jim Morrison, who, turned to alcohol and drugs and died very early. Now, there is a conspiracy about that as well, but I'm not going to go into that on this particular podcast. But you see what I mean?
100%. I think I was listening to an interesting conversation between James Baldwin and I think it was can't remember who the interviewer was, but just the other day. And James Baldwin says artists shouldn't be successful. What does he? And then he explained it afterwards. He says as soon as you start chasing success as an artist, you're chasing adoration and acceptance. And in many respects, and so he's rather than expressing what is true for you to express. And I think it's just I'm not saying he's right or wrong. I just think it's an interesting perspective.
So, since you're not the first guest I've had on who's done this, who's left their life and done something different, left their previous life. You mentioned the fact, conditioned from a young age, go to university, great job, and you're set for life, and you're going to be very happy, right? Which, as almost everyone knows, doesn't really happen, of course. Since you've gone back and gotten in touch with what you really want to do, how have your views on life changed?
Well, it's interesting how I'm much more. So the first major change actually is that in the last year, I've gone through what I might describe as an individuation process. I think a lot of, again, going back to indigenous traditional cultures, they'll have a process where the boy or the girl turns to a man or a woman. And what that means is it's a ceremony which basically can have different levels of pain involved in it. But essentially, it's about what's the word? I can't think of the word. About cutting the ties between childhood and between the child and the parents as well. So the child becomes an adult and they become self-responsible. And I can see in the last year, I'm in my early 40s now, that I've become a self-responsible adult in the last year. And that might sound grandiose, but what do I mean by that? I'm learning to no longer care so much about what other people think about what I do and take responsibility for my actions. But what that also means is also recognizing where I'm coming from in any situation. So seeing when I'm I have a couple of limiting beliefs. One of them is that I'm not powerful. So I need to look to others to confirm my place in the world. So when I'm not aware of what I'm doing, I can be setting myself up to finding people who give me power and show me that I'm capable. Another one is worth. A lot of people have this, believing that I'm not worthy, therefore I need to be seeking worth outside of myself. And so by recognizing when I'm in those patterns of behavior, I recognize I can come out of them and then go, to your point, we spoke about this earlier, go for what I really want. Because what I really want actually will take a lot less energy than trying to resolve all these other things, which actually are not resolvable. I'll never be able to resolve a feeling of lack of worth. I think it's always going to be there.
Yeah. Yes. There was one thing you mentioned before as well. I'm going to bring you back to it about healing yourself through breathing. So I'd started doing, I was like probably about 10 years ago, actually. I used to do a lot of the Wim Hof stuff, that sort of breathing. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't really get much from it. I didn't feel like I got much from it, apart from you feel it's like a altered state. Okay, so I did get something from it. You feel like you're in an altered state, that's for sure. But I didn't really notice it in my day-to-day life. For instance, I didn't walk around. It was a brief few minutes. It would help me get to sleep if I was having some insomnia or something. But would like to hear what your thoughts on it are.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that I remember. So it was my Indian client a few years ago. He said to me, if we learn how to breathe properly, like as in fully breathe into the bottom of your lungs, can't remember what the biological term is, and then breathe out.
Solar plexus.
There you go, exactly. Then we'll do away with a lot of particularly the word disease comes from dis-ease, which is another topic which we could go down another day. But his belief in the Indian Ayurvedic system of medicine is that if we breathe properly, then we do away with a lot of our illnesses. I'm not mastering that. I've become more conscious of it again recently. And I recognize that when I do breathe deep, but it's over a period of time. I tend to do it when I'm stressed. I'm like, okay, I'm stressed, breathe deeply, learn how to breathe properly. But that's not really how it works. It's about doing that all the time rather than doing it just when I'm feeling stressed. I've never tried Wim Hof, but I know that he uses it as a means of controlling his body temperature and when he's in cold water, doesn't he?
Well, yes. I mean, that's a side effect of it, I guess. It's taking control of your autonomic nervous system, which people thought was impossible. You can't. It's autonomic for a reason. You can't control it, but apparently you can. And through I think it's called Tumo breathing. It's the Indian or the Tibetan, the Himalayan monks. They use that particular breathwork technique called Tumo. Inner fire, it's called. Tumo means, or I don't know if it means inner fire, but you create this heat within your body. But like I said, it didn't really do, if I was sick. But I guess it's never about being sick. Sick is when you're ill. It's never about you're not going to start breathing and you're going to start getting better. It's the lead up. You should have been doing that in the lead up to it, But do you use any breathwork techniques yourself?
No. Like I said, when I'm stressed, then yeah, I can revert back to it, but I haven't. It was just something I remembered a few weeks ago. I was like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, there's that. If I was to do that, then it would support me.
Yeah.
Um,
So the other thing
so
we
it's more
were,
a case.
yeah, we were talking about over the weekend about being supernatural, and I liked what you were saying about that. So if you want to go into, and we can finish on that, and I'll let you get back to your art
Supernatural.
about being supernatural.
Yeah, I remember that being a thread. I can't remember where we were with
And we
that.
were talking about how I mentioned, and I said to you that you know you could. It's not
Yes, I
something.
remember what it was. It was the word weird.
Yeah,
So,
that's it.
so
We'll get there in the end.
you often hear the word weird bandied around, and when I look, if you look up the word weird in the dictionary, one of the definitions of the word weird is supernatural, and weirdness is something I'm starting to embrace. And what do I understand by that? Weirdness coming from the supernatural, coming from higher consciousness. And I just completed an exhibition. Well, I say just, it was last year. I was in Berlin for an art residency. And at the end of that, I put on a very immersive show with paintings that I'd painted, with music that a sound artist had created using my poetry, and then costumes that I'd created with a fashion designer and then painted. And the fashion designer and I did an intuitive, improvised dance in the space with the music, with the paintings in the background. And it was weird. It was kind of, but I was inspired by the birds of paradise that I'd seen in some of David Attenborough's footage, where you've got these, but the male bird is doing a dance to attract the female bird, and the whole theme of that was the dance between the heart and soul. Between it was called the dance of hide and seek, so it's the dance between the heart and the mind, and it was weird. But for me, that's what the supernatural is. It's having the courage and the balls to create something completely new, knowing that it may be judged, it may be whatever. But if I don't go there, then I'm not creating something that is truly unique to me.
I get you. And who wouldn't want to be supernatural? I mean, I'd love to be
Exactly.
I'd love to be supernatural or a magician. Imagine that. You know, a real magician, not a David Copperfield number. I'm talking about, you know, you can create matter. I was discussing this with my son, 10-year-old, starting to ask the different questions, difficult questions, saying about dying and coming back to life. We're talking about, because it was coming up to Easter and they were doing a project for Easter at school. And he said, you know, but I don't believe that Jesus could die and come back to life. And I said, well, you know, if you go and read some of the old ancient Indian texts, apparently people do die and come back to life, you know, according to eyewitness reports and people who pronounced dead. And then a few days later, they come, you know, some yogi comes back to life and says, you know, I told you I could do it.
Showed you.
Yeah, exactly. Now, we in the West go, yeah, all right, that was, there must be some fuckery about, but is there? Who, you know, if it's, and none of these are accounts from a long time ago as well. These are the accounts from, you know, the Victorian times when the British were in India, about all these holy men, is the word I'd use, who could do these incredible things. You know, one guy, I forget his name, but he went 453 days without food. And they studied him, and it was in the 70s or 80s. And they studied him in America, and he didn't eat for 450, and he didn't lose any weight. You know, he was fine, just drank water, you know?
Yeah, I've heard of that. I read Autobiography of a Yogi.
Yeah, great book. One of my
Great book,
favorites.
hey, where they talk about that.
Yeah.
But I think just
Parahamsana Yogananda. That's the name of the
that's it.
author.
Exactly.
Great
Brilliant
book.
book.
I highly recommend that. It's just a really, really good story. If you like a good story, whether you are into that particular subject, I don't think it makes a difference. It's a really, really good story to read, people. Autobiography of a Yogi.
Who's your favorite artist, Nicole?
What are you talking? As in,
Anything.
Prince. I like Prince. I like David Bowie, and I'm pretty sure there's a few. I mean, if we're talking music, I think there's a few people, few artists who have been, who have definitely tapped in to a higher level of consciousness. And I use Prince in there, and David Bowie for sure. The others will come to me.
I think. Go on.
For going back in time, Mozart, Chopin, all these people who can hear or even see frequencies that they can put down on paper, and that staggers me that people can actually write sound. They can in musical notation and create frequencies which, well, they're not frequencies, these notes, which create frequencies, of course. So I was right. And you hear them now and they're still mind blowing. And especially if you hear them live, it brings you to another level of emotion, or gives you a connection to a higher level, even if it's briefly. Have you been to the St. Peter's in Rome?
A long time ago.
To the Vatican. I mean, you
A
walk
long
in and
time
that
ago.
building that is something else. That is really something else. And I went to the Sistine Chapel, and I went in November, so it was actually it was very few people there. I think it was just our group, but we were maybe about 20 people in there, as opposed to crammed in, totally. And that again is mind blowing. Anything like that sort of beauty, I really appreciate. But my favorite artist, I couldn't possibly say.
I think one of the ones that comes to mind for me is Bjork. So that's obviously not a visual artist, but
Bjork.
the female singer, yeah,
Yeah,
Bjork.
yeah. Oh, she's very
Because I
creative.
mean,
Yeah.
she's like weirdness epitomized, right? But I think the interesting thing about the Sistine Chapel. So I heard a story when Michelangelo was painting the Sistine Chapel. Whoever it was who commissioned him, I suppose it was the Catholic Church, I imagine, was the Pope, disappointed that he wasn't doing enough work, and that he was that was it, that he was sleeping in the chapel. But he would sleep on the raft, in the scaffolding system underneath the painting. And he said, I'm doing it so that at night when I dream, I'm capturing the vibrations of the chapel to then put back into the frescoes that I paint in the morning. And for me, that's a whole thing. We touched on vibration earlier, and low vibration, high vibration. And for me, art is a means, in whatever form, is a means of capturing vibration. And as an artist, that's what I do, is I put vibration, I put intention into my work, so that when people see it, they are drawn to that vibration.
Yeah, and that's fundamentally what I was trying to say in a long-winded way before, is that you're picking up on the vibration and the energy coming out of it. And there's some places you walk into, or some paintings you see, that I'm always drawn to. And I go, there's a painting, and I think it's Canaletto. I think that's his name. I think it is. He does really lifelike, looks like a photograph basically. But in Florence, in the or sunset. I'm pretty ssure it's Florence, but it's at the National Gallery in Edinburgh, and I always go there whenever I'm walking past because it's free. I just walk in and I'll go in there and stand there for a good 10 minutes, and just because it's a big, huge thing as well. It's like a giant poster, but it's just so incredible. But there's lots of things like that. So, but we are drawn as human beings, drawn to frequency, which is why if you go to see a Taylor Swift concert nowadays, they her handlers, the people who run the record company people, know how to put on a great show because they've tapped into the light frequencies, the sound frequencies, the harmonies that she's using in her songs. And people say, oh my gosh, this is the best concert you've ever seen, because they have nailed it to a T, how to put on an amazing show. But that's mechanically done. It's scientifically done, as opposed to the artistic way. Does that make sense?
That's fascinating. Yeah, I'd often wondered why she'd become so big, and that explains it. It's because she's tapping into a
Totally.
frequency.
Yeah. So my wife went, well, her and her friends went, and she'd never even she could barely tell you a Taylor Swift song, right? And I said to her, by the way, she is this is a CIA mind control asset. Again, we're going down that, but it's true. When the CIA comes out on their own Twitter handle and says, "See, Taylor Swift is not a psyop," that means for a fact that she's a psyop. And she's the mind control psychological operation aspect of it. And I said to her, and she says, "Oh yeah, you and your nonsense again." And she came back, and I said, "You're going to go in there, and you're going to be subjected to weapons grade, and I mean the best in the business, weapons grade psychological operation, and a mind control with, like I said, sound, light, and harmonies, all that. And you've got 90,000 people, mainly females, screaming. So it's creating that hysteria at the same time. It's going to be very, very, very intoxicating." And she goes, it's not going to happen to me. I'm not going to get sucked in. She came back. She said, "Oh my, that was the best concert. Oh, it was incredible. I want to go and see it again." And I said,
There you
"See,
go.
I told you." But hey, no one listens to me. So some people listen to me. Thank you. Thank you for listening. They don't listen to the advice. Anyway, I don't know if you want to comment on that, Nick, and then we'll wrap up and let you get away.
Yeah, I think that's. I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it? It's the use of frequency again. It's
Totally, but
we're
not in an
every
organic way or whatever you want to call it.
yeah,
It's not
exactly.
inspired by someone who's in touch with a higher level of consciousness. It is indeed a manufactured way, and it disgusts me and makes me feel physically sick that this sort of thing happens and people get taken in by it. Nicholas, bothers me,
and it works,
and it works
which is
extremely well.
For me, I think it's just curious. It just helps me understand.
Yeah, that doesn't bother me. I just, you have to shake your head and say, "Okay, fine."
Oh,
but what works. It's like candy floss.
What works exactly.
So what have you got coming up? Anything coming up?
I'm actually
summer?
about to lead a workshop with my hosts here in Ibiza, literally in a few minutes' time.
Right.
On art and creativity and imagination. So very much looking forward to that.
That's great.
And then I'm working on a new collection of paintings, which is all about the spirit of a certain place. I tend to keep them quite mum's the word, or whatever you call it, until they're finished. But that's kind of the theme that I'm working with. So the spirit of certain places that mean a lot to me.
Well, you have to come back to our little spot in the mountains. It's good. It's a good energy place. Ibiza is a good energy place as well. But listen, it was an absolute pleasure to meet you last weekend, and good to have you come back on and talk a bit further on this. If only we had some microphones with us on Friday, that would have been
fun. Yeah, on the slopes.
An interesting podcast. Didn't have my stuff with me, but I really appreciate you, Nicholas, and I really want come and hang out again. Maybe if I'm down in Ibiza this summer, there is a possibility we can come down. If not, next time we're in Switzerland, let me know and we can maybe do this again.
Sounds good.
All right, bud. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Mr. Kindness.
You're welcome. All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
And okay, cool.